supremacy, and it can only be enforced if Union troops had captured territory in the South, in the Confederacy. Only about 500,000 enslaved men and women, we think, actually got their freedom from the Emancipation Proclamation. And James, there were 3.9 million enslaved African Americans. So the overwhelming majority of our ancestors were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation.
So the significance then of General Gordon Granger going to Galveston?
We all think that the Civil War ended when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, which was April 9th, 1865. But that's not true. There were several different Confederate armies. So Texas finally surrenders to the Union on June 2nd. Gordon Granger comes, and on June 19th in Galveston, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation because now the Union Army is in possession of the territory. So that's the true story.
I would like to tell you that that is the true story, but that would be a lie in reality. Well, now, I'm not saying that what he said were not events that occurred. What I'm telling you is that, by the way, the Emancipation Proclamation did not liberate us, as you all know. It transferred ownership, transferred authority and jurisdiction, if, of course, you could conquer the areas that we were in. I would like to tell you that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were what liberated us. No, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments technically outlawed chattel slavery. That is, you couldn't be born a slave. Well, you could not be born a slave, though you could still be maneuvered into slavery. 14th, 15th Amendments acknowledged our citizenship, although now we see where everything that's given to us is usually turned later to be weaponized against us. And we've watched and witnessed as that has occurred also. So when you hear about these things, that happens, that occurs. And I want to take a moment here to go a little bit further because no. Remember, even the Emancipation Proclamation doesn't have any efficacy if you do not have the might and the power to enforce it. I showed you all this article a few days ago, and I want to revisit it here now from Vice. And I've held on to this one now for years. It's actually been sitting for years and years, and I never really posted it, never really used it, but it's been sitting for years now. Black people were enslaved in the U.S. well into the 1960s. I want to read this for you here. I want to read this for you. I want you to see this, and I want to read this for you because I want you to see what happened here. I want to go down a little bit here. The writer of this article, she talks about how my mother always talked to me about our family history and the family members who had passed on. She only knew so many stories, so oftentimes she would tell the same ones over and over again. Each time she repeated the story, I felt like she was trying to give me a message. It was like she was trying to tell me that if I wanted to know more about who we were, I would have to dig deeper. We knew our family had once been slaves in Louisiana. In 1994, I started to look into historical records and public records. I found my ancestors in the 1853 inventory belonging to Benjamin and Celia Bankston Richardson, written down alongside other personal belongings that included spoons, forks, hogs, cows, and a sofa, were my great-great-grandparents, Thomas and Carrie Richardson. She said that she went looking into historical records and public records. So for those of you who don't understand what she's actually saying, what she's saying is that she went into looking into the records and she found records of somebody's property, found their property records. And when he looked into one family's property records, alongside spoons, forks, cows, and a sofa, were also written the names of her great-great-grandparents. So her great-great-grandparents were listed on somebody's list of their personal property right alongside the silverware and the agriculture and the cattle. Right next to them. You don't have anybody that you know outside of our experience as the freedmen of America who can relay this experience and tell you that this is their family's experience. The Italians and the Irish and the indentured servants were not slaves. They can't show you anything like this. They can show you a contract and an agreement. They cannot show you that they were property. This is what I'm talking about here. Nobody can go and take a look through the property books and property records and find, oh, there's the names of your family there. Don't you dare allow anybody to sit up here and bamboozle you into accepting that. It goes on to say here, for those of you who did not know, by the way, let me just stop for a moment. For those of you who did not know, that's the way chattel slavery worked. I understand your schools don't teach you this now, which is why we have to teach you this. When we say that you were property, we mean that you are listed on the property records. So for most of you, if your family were slaves, you can actually find property records because they were listed there. So all this talk that you hear about, oh, the slave stocks and the banks and these financial institutions, by the way, yeah, their public records will list them also. The public records will list that also. So when you see a house, most of you are used to going to City Hall and looking up a house or looking up a corporation or looking up a car and saying, okay, there's public records for a house or a car or a corporation. Yeah, but for the property records and listing owned property, the people, if you own slaves, well, that was documented as property too. That is why, for example, if a white man raped a black female slave, he was not guilty of rape. Let me say it again. If a white man raped a black female slave, he was not guilty of the crime of rape. Remember, she is not human. Remember? She's only 3/5 of a person. She is technically and legally not a human being. Thus, she does not have constitutional rights or human rights. At best, or should I say at worst, he is guilty. He would be found guilty of despoiling another man's property. So consider it the same as if you came home and found your neighbor whipping your dog. Hey, you are despoiling my dog. Well, I'm not killing it. I'm not killing him and doing any permanent damage to it here. So you go, hey, this fellow over here. Well, what is he doing? He's despoiling my dog. He's despoiling my property. He's molesting my property. This is my property, and he's over here molesting it. You know, like if somebody were sitting on your front, like loitering. They're loitering on your front porch. No, I'm serious. No, I'm serious. He would not be found guilty of assault, much less rape. Ain't gonna happen. At best, he is guilty of despoiling somebody else's property. Yeah, like graffiti. Like graffiti. Only not as serious. That is our experience. That is what they are currently trying to ethnically cleanse from the history books in Texas, in Florida, in Alabama, in Tennessee, an all-out assault against us, just us. But it doesn't stop there. They go on to say here that Carrie and her child, they're talking about Thomas and Carrie Richardson, Carrie and her child, Thomas, had been appraised at $1,100. Seeing my ancestors' perceived value written on a piece of paper changed me. It also set forth the direction of my life. It was terribly painful, but I needed to know more. What did they do after emancipation in 1863? Where did they go? I tracked down freedmen contracts of the Harrell side of my family and proved that they were sharecroppers. Word started spreading around New Orleans about how I was using genealogy to connect the dots to a lost history. Soon enough, people started requesting that I come and speak about how I was uncovering my family story so they could do the same for themselves. It became a chance to find out who we were and where we came from as descendants of enslaved people. This was a chance to learn a history we were never taught in school. Folks, I want to tell you something here. Please understand that there is a reason that they have brought in so many folks who are not from our lineage, and they are opening the floodgates of the borders to let in all of these people. Because think about this, and all these folks that what has been stolen from us, what can you do if we're a majority of the population in those places? You won't be able to stonewall us forever, so you better flood the zone with as many non-citizens of our background, and then hope that that causes the debt to go away. That is just how seriously they take this. If you want to know why it is that it seems like they're doing a suicide run on themselves, it is because that's the only way to prevent this from happening, because the record books and the history books and the records are now being used against them. You will not be able to hold that tide back forever unless you flood the zone with a bunch of folks not from our background and hope that that holds them.
It means they have
That's
to.
the best that you can do
That
in these
means that
circumstances,
they
is
have
hope
to
that holds
invest
them.
in the lies, and the
She goes on to say here, the only fact that seems certain was that slavery ended
And
with the
they
passing of the
will.
Emancipation Proclamation in
They
1863. But even that turned out to be less than true. One day, a woman familiar with my work approached me and said, "Antoinette, I know a group of people who didn't receive their freedom until the 1950s. She said, "Antoinette, I know a group of people who didn't receive their freedom until the 1950s. Hang on to your hats, though, folks. We ain't done yet. She had me over to her house where I met about 20 people, all who had worked on the Waterford Plantation in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana. They told me they had worked the fields for most of their lives. One way or another, they had become indebted to the plantation's owner and were not allowed to leave the property. Not allowed to leave the property. This situation had them living their lives as 20th century slaves. At the end of the harvest, when they tried to settle up with the owner, they were always told they didn't make it into the black and to try again next year. Every passing year, the workers fell deeper and deeper in debt. Some of those folks were tied to that land into the 1960s. You have had black people who have fought in every conflict in this nation, fighting in World War I, fighting for, quote, liberation, World War II, fighting for a freedom that they did not have. fighting for a freedom that they themselves did not have, and you're given the sanitized version about segregation. Fighting for a freedom that they did not have. They're going to say, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Most shocking of all was their fear. I saw time and time again, people were afraid to share their stories. They were afraid to give this information to me, even behind closed doors decades later. They believed that they might somehow get sent back to a plantation that wasn't even operating anymore. Actually, that's an untrue statement. That is an untrue statement. That's an untrue statement. I'm not just saying that as hyperbole. That's an untrue statement. As I would realize, people were afraid to share their stories because in the South, so many of the same families who own these plantations are still running local government and big businesses. So you see, when we talk about the Southern United States and Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama, and you talk about them being, quote unquote, the poorest states, you got to understand, well, they are relatively poor, but there is a group in those states who are relatively wealthy relative to the people that they're oppressing. So they're okay with the absolutely despicable distinction of being dirt poor compared to the rest of the states in the Union, so long as these modern day barbarians and these modern day Neanderthals are able to maintain control over these places now. They're all right with these places being in abject poverty so long as they are the richest ones in abject poverty. And that's the real issue with Louisiana and Arkansas and Mississippi and Alabama. That's the real issue with those states. You just think they're poor when you compare them to other places. But when you compare them to the population that they're attempting to oppress, well, then it all makes sense now. They're the kings of the ashes. And they would rather have that than to actually have a truly prosperous place that they do not control. So many of the same white families who own these plantations are still running local government and big businesses. They still hold the power. So the poor and disenfranchised really don't have anywhere to share these injustices without fearing major repercussions. To most folks, it just isn't worth the risk. So sadly, most situations of this sort go unreported. Folks, do you understand? I've been here. I am here. You're watching an out-of-towner, 50 Cent, coming into my city and buying things. I just had a story about he bought some real estate property downtown in Shreveport. Those out-of-towners who've been able to do that because they've made the laws here. I can go into stories about that for a riverfront development here. They did it on the Bossier side, but they blocked it on the Shreveport side, and they had some Sambos over here to help them to do that as well. They're trying to hold out as long as they possibly can. They're not actually going anywhere. It's really just about blocking you. They want to keep the world frozen in time in antebellum slavery where they are in charge, and you all are just the nice, smiling pickaninnies. And that's really what they want. And so it is of the utmost importance that they not teach your children this. Your children need to not be taught any of this, because take a look at the intrinsic, visceral, emotional reaction that most of you are having right now. You were not slaves in the field, but take a look at your emotional reaction that you're having right now. There's no way they could contain that. There's no way they could hold that back. There's no way they could stop that. They know that they would be facing you within a few years. They know that with this being passed down to you, they'll only be having to face you in a few years. So it is of the utmost importance that they make sure that other folks do not pass this on to you, and that you are not aware of that. So yes, these older folks here would be worried about that. That's what they're concerned about. So yes, their concerns are actually very, very valid. You have a lot of small towns in Louisiana, a lot of small towns, small villages. Relatively speaking, it wouldn't take a lot to overthrow them and stop them. It wouldn't take a lot to do so, which is why it is important to keep you in abject poverty. Yeah, the white folks are not really rich, but if they make sure that you don't have anything at all, then they'll never have to pay for their sins. And this is why we need reparations, because they are continuing it to this very day. You have an ongoing criminal enterprise. The criminal enterprise is ongoing. Therefore, the resolution for it needs to be ongoing. It don't stop in 1868.
This is Jason Black speaking.
Now, listen to this next part.
Jason
6
Black.
months after that meeting, talking about the folks who told them that my people we didn't receive our freedom until the 1950s. She then says, 6 months after that meeting, I was giving a lecture on genealogy and reparations in Amity, Louisiana, when I met May Louise Walls Miller. May walked in after the lecture was over, demanding to speak to me. She walked up, looked me in the eye, and stated, I didn't get my freedom until 1963. I didn't get my freedom until 1963. Some of you listening to me right now, you were born before she got her freedom. Now listen to the story that unfolds here. I do have a little bit of a caveat to give to part of it, but I want you to listen to the story here. And by the way, prepare yourselves. I must tell you to brace yourselves before I even get started to this. Because we're going to have us a conversation here about slavery on American soil in the 20th century. A century after the so-called Proclamation of Emancipation. A century after that, I want you to hear what she says. She says, May's father, Cain Wall, lost his land by signing a contract he couldn't read that had sealed his entire family's fate. As a young girl, May didn't know that her family's situation was different from anyone else's. The family didn't have TV. So May just assumed everyone lived the same way her brothers and sisters did. They were not permitted to leave the land and were subject to regular beatings from the landowners. When May got a bit older, she would be told to come up to work in the main house with her mother. Now listen to what work means. Here, she would be raped by whatever men were present. Most times, she and her mother were raped simultaneously alongside each other. They were not permitted to leave the land. They were beaten regularly. And when this young girl got a bit older, now she doesn't give a number or an age for what, quote, a bit older is, or what a, quote, bit older means. I'm going into this detail because many of you have children who would probably be her age, and I will allow you to speculate about how old would you need to be for a bunch of sadistic white supremacist animals to consider you to be old enough. So when this girl, quote, got a bit older, she was told to come out of the fields. Come out the fields and come up to work in the main house with your mother. And here you will be sexually ravaged by whatever men were present. The only thing I don't like here is because of her wording of this, I think what she's doing is actually trying to diminish some of the gravity of this. Whatever men were present. Because it sounds like somebody's running a whorehouse. Sounds like somebody's running a whorehouse, and if we do not say it in those terms and phrase it in those terms, then we are seriously diminishing the gravity of what you're reading and what you're seeing. Here she would be raped by whatever men were present. Most times, and I'm emphasizing most times, she and her mother were raped simultaneously alongside each other. Do you think that we are ever going to allow these evil, diabolical bastards to get off the hook for this? Ever? In an eternity of lifetimes, do you think we would ever allow them to get away with this? Do you think we're ever going to let them just get up and walk away? Do you think we're ever going to allow them to sanitize the history books, sanitize the records, erase the history of it? Do you think we are ever going to allow you to do that?
We're trapped.
And do you think that what you will pay is going to get less with time, or do you think it's going to get more? They go on to say here that her father, Cain, couldn't take the suffering anymore and tried to flee the property by himself in the middle of the night. Now, I don't like the way that was phrased. So you remember Vice's story about white supremacists and finding some feminist-minded female to sit up here and tell the story. I don't like the way that was phrased because she's trying to get real specific here. And I'm like, okay, she was real vague about the females, real specific here. And I'm not, I have some skepticism about the context of this happening here. So let me just say that straight up now. I have some skepticism about that. But she says her father, Cain, couldn't take the suffering anymore and tried to flee the property by himself in the middle of the night. His plan was to register for the army and get stationed far away, but he was picked up by some folks claiming they would help him. Instead, they took him right back to the farm, where he was brutally beaten in front of his family. So according to this story here, her father tried to get away and somebody else in the area saw him and they said they were going to help him, but instead they took him right back to the farm. White supremacy is a system. You do not have any Irish, Italian, Asian, Latino, or any other people that you know telling you about what they did in the 1800s who have stories like this in the 1900s. Nobody else has this experience. No one. Nobody else got an experience like this. Nobody else has stories in their families about how they were running from the plantations, and then the local people in the area came and grabbed them and took them up and told them, okay, we're taking them back to the farm. Nobody else has that. Now listen to the next sentence here. When May was about 14, she decided she would no longer go up to the house. That's why I don't like this woman who wrote this article here. I'm not cool on this, Miss Merrill. I'm not cool on the way this is done. So I'm hoping Vice just edited this for you, but I don't like the way this was done. I really don't. I don't like that. Because the age here, when May was about 14, then how old was she when this was happening? Because it says when she got to 14. And how many years were they raping her and her mother together like that? How long was that going on? How long? That's a context we all would like to know. If it was 14, and by the way, 14 is young enough. When did they start taking advantage of this girl? When did they start doing it? If that's when she wanted to end, when did it start? Now, you hear the next part here. When May was about 14, she decided she would no longer go up to the house. Her family pleaded with her as the punishment would come down on all of them. May refused and sassed the farm owner's wife when she told her to work. Worrying that May would be killed by the owners, Cain beat his own daughter bloody in hopes of saving her. That evening, still covered in blood, May ran away through the woods. She was hiding in the bushes by the road when a family rode by with their mule cart. The lady on the cart saw the bush moving. She got off to find May crying, bloodied, and terrified. The white family took her in and rescued the rest of the Walls later that night. A white family took her in and rescued the rest of the Walls later that night. There's white privilege for you there too, which is, by the way, it didn't take an act of the legislature or anything. Another white family came up and just said, hey, get them folk about there. So you have one family that turned the men in and they let the females go. Did you get that? Did you all see that? When they found the men, they sent them back to the plantations. When they found the females, they let them go. So you see this little strategy that they've used now for a long time of preferential treatment there. So I just wanted to point it out to you all to see that, by the way, when they found the men, they beat them and sent them back. When they found the girls, they let them go. So that tells you who they're afraid of. That tells you who they're afraid of. They go on to say here, these stories are more common than you think. There were also, now here's where she gets off code, by the way, furthermore. There were also Polish, Hungarian, and Italian immigrants, as well as other nationalities who got caught up in these situations in the American South, but the vast majority of 20th century slaves were of African descent. Okay, folks, let me explain to you about that right there, because you shouldn't say things like that. Polish, Hungarian, Italian immigrants here. We ain't talking about some folks who are just somebody was in a closet. We ain't talking about no indentured servants. We're not talking about anything like that. There were no groups of white folk rounding up other white people to send. There were no plantations where white folk worked. So this is outrageously misleading here. There were no plantations where white folk were working. That's why you can't find any Italian families who can tell you about their families working on the plantations under any circumstances. You didn't have the ability to enslave white people. So we're not talking about some folks over here that somebody put in a broom closet and took advantage of. Like, there's stories today. Remember, there was a story a couple of years ago of some Asians. They had, their Asian housekeepers or whatever brought over here from China and basically had them locked up in their apartment for 3 or 4 years. We're not, that's not the same as what happened to us. That's not the same. That's not a holdover. These are people who made a deal with the devil somewhere, and it went off the rails from what they expected. You did not have a society and a town that was backing it up. They don't have stories of, yeah, I got out one night, but these other folks found me and beat me and took me back where I was. They don't have stories like that. So I take grievous exception to the woman who wrote this article in this regard, that she keeps doing things like this. And I'm like, okay, I'm very suspicious why you keep doing stuff like this. Because I can show you where it's really not consistent or factual, but you keep doing that. So I would be remiss if I didn't take this moment here to acknowledge, by the way, I don't like the fact she keeps doing that. So I'm kind of skeptical of some of the things she's saying in there. I know the stuff about holding people captive and whatnot into the 50s and 60s is true. We got other stories like that, but I don't like the way that she's framing some of these things. I don't like that. She goes on to say here that when I met May, her father, Cain, was still alive. He was 107 years old, but his mind was still incredibly sharp. A few times we sat together with May and the other siblings. It was a brutal catharsis for them to speak about what happened on that farm. I'll never forget the look in their eyes when one would speak about a horror they endured. It was clear they had never shared their individual stories with one another. It was something that was in their past. It was in the past, so there was no reason to bring it up. One day, Cain was watching the television, and there was a Caucasian man with stark white hair on the program. The way he looked must have reminded Cain of someone from the farm. Cain believed that because he had told me what happened on the farm, that the man on TV was going to come to his house and drag him back. Opening the suppressed memories upset him so much he ended up in the hospital. The family kept me away for a while after that. But May and I became good friends and would lecture together. There were unusual tricks she had from her upbringing. Sometimes when we would be at an event where there was free food, she couldn't stop eating. She told me this was from years of not knowing when she would eat again. There were other times she would need to take her shoes off. She had grown up not wearing shoes and said sometimes her feet felt uncomfortable when she wore them. The nuances of May's PTSD from growing up as a slave gave me a look into what life must have been like for many of our ancestors who were held under such inhumane conditions. May died in 2014. She was a fearless, beautiful spirit and has left a gigantic void. I am glad her brother Arthur is continuing to tell the Walls family story. People who hear these stories will often say, you should have gone to the police. You should have run sooner. But the land down here goes on forever. These plantations are a country unto themselves. The property goes from can't see to can't see. For those of you who don't know your Southern colloquialisms. Even if you could run, where would you go? Who would you go to? Now, I want to give you all a bit of a clarification here. For any of you who've driven along Interstate 20 when you get east of Monroe, Louisiana, or if you're coming from Vicksburg, Mississippi, across the Mississippi River Bridge into Louisiana, y'all realize it takes you about an hour going 70 miles an hour. It takes you a little over an hour to get to the next city. So even to this day, in 2014, 21st century America, with an interstate highway system from the Mississippi River to the next city takes you over an hour to get there, and that's if you're going 75 miles per hour, and nobody is going 75. They're going considerably faster. By the way, now that's if you have a car. Today, that's how long it would take you if you could drive. And that's just going west. Once you get past Vicksburg, Mississippi, you ain't really got nothing till you get to Jackson. Now I want to take you even further. Coming up through Florida. To this day today, if you go out Interstate 75, if you go out that way. But I was telling you all before, going through lake cities. Do you see how long you can drive if you're going out that way? Do you see how long you can drive going out that way? And today, my truck drivers, do you realize how long if you drive, for example, if you go from Texarkana up to DeQueen, Arkansas, you realize how long you can drive and hit nothing? For my folks going from Arkansas to Tennessee, out Interstate 30. Out Interstate 30, for those of you who've been through Arkansas, through Interstate 30, over that farmland. How many of you have been going through Arkansas through Interstate 30? Through all that farmland they got up there to take you up to 40. That will take you 3 good hours to drive through that. In 2024, not 1924, not 1864, 2024 today, it'll take you 3 or 4 hours to drive through that, and there's nothing out there. To my truck drivers and my people who live in Arkansas, or those of you who come down through Memphis, through Arkansas, there's nothing there. Today, it's one thing to walk a few miles of it. Try walking 70 or 100 in June, July, August, September. Much less going to Alabama or Georgia. Yeah, you got something when you're on Interstate 20. But once you get past the Atlanta metro area, there ain't really nothing between that and Augusta. And then once you get past Augusta, there ain't nothing till you get way on up around through South Carolina. And I'm up around till you get to Florence. So you're going to drive another hour or so for that. Folks, there are whole areas in this country right now today where you could drive 2 or 3 hours not running anything. Today. Most of you avoid those areas. Most of you fly because you don't want to drive through it. I drive all the time. I've driven all over this country, everywhere you can imagine. Think about that for a few moments. I'm not even talking about in Rocky Mountain territory or the Midwestern states that are known for being desolate in that regard and the last ones populated. I'm not talking about huge pieces of land like Northern California. I'm talking about places that have made folks rich and are the agricultural centers of this nation in the southern United States, and you would think there'd be people everywhere. You would think there'd be people everywhere. And what I'm telling you is there are gigantic swaths of land that you can drive across today, that you could drive over and not run into anything for hours when somebody telling you, why didn't you get up and run? Why didn't you get up and leave? With them not even knowing where leaving is. Do you understand that? They don't even know where leaving is. Furthermore, you're a fugitive. Remember? So you're talking with your liberated mindset. Nobody's hunting you. But for them, they would be fugitives. They're expecting if anybody sees me, they're going to grab me. Now, you imagine if I told you I want you to walk for the next 70 miles. I want you to walk for the next 70 miles, right? No food, no water, and nobody can see you. And you'd be like, you're out of your mind. 70 miles? There's no way nobody's going to see me. Furthermore, to make matters more complicated, remember what I told you about that interstate system thing that you all are so accustomed to today. There's a reason why you built interstate systems. And remember, a lot of these freeways weren't even around in the 1950s and 60s. We only started building them by the 1950s and 60s. So the interstates that you all are familiar with didn't exist. How many times have you all been driving down the freeway over Interstate 10, 20, 30, 40, Interstate 5, Interstate 95, 85, 285, and you cross some river or some bayou or some ravine? It's real easy for you to talk about crossing the river if there's a bridge there. But if there isn't one, and back then there wouldn't have been one, how would you cross it then? Now remember, even if you had to do it today, you can't get on even if there was a freeway for you to go down today, you can't go down the freeway. Remember, you'll be seen, which means that all the terrain you'd have to cross would have to be wooded. You would have to go through the woods and stay in the woods to keep from being seen. Now, in 2024 today, my truck drivers will bear me witness, although a lot of you, if any of you do any long distance driving, you know it too. Coming through Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, it is nothing to see deer on the side of the freeway. It is nothing to see deer on the side of the freeway. And in Louisiana, it's not unknown to have bears peeking their heads out. In 2024, people, not 1964, 2024. You can see those things today. Many of you who driven at night, like sometimes your heart will skip a beat because you look out the side of your window and you see some glowing eyes. And then you realize, oh, those are deer. And you're hoping that the damn thing doesn't try to cross the interstate in front of you. That's a common sight for anybody who drives long distance. Okay, and now you're off in those woods, trying to stay in the woods to keep the two-legged predators from finding you. And meanwhile, there's deer and antelope, gators, bears, snakes, spiders, and everything else. Now, even if you could walk at 7 miles an hour for 10 hours, which would cover 70 miles, even if you could do that, number one, where are you going? And number two, you're going to have to cross over wooded terrain the entire time. Talk about your challenges. So you cannot think with the mindset you got today. If I drop you off in them woods and say, okay, you leave these woods and get on the freeway, if anybody sees you, we grabbing you, you're like, okay, I'll stay in the woods. And the first time you hit a bayou, the first time you hit a river, the first time you hit a ravine, life is about to get interesting. Oh yeah, and did I remind you, you don't have any food or water? By the way, did I remind you, you don't have any food or water with you? Okay. Going to say here, do I believe May's family was the last to be freed? No. Slavery will continue to redefine itself for African Americans for years to come. The school-to-prison pipeline and private penitentiaries are just a few of the new ways to guarantee that Black people provide free labor for the system at large. However, I also believe there are still African families who are tied to Southern farms in the most antebellum sense of speaking. If we don't investigate and bring to light how slavery quietly continued, it could happen again. To which I tell you that it has not stopped. That's the whole point.
Exactly.
That's the entire point.
Exactly.
It hasn't stopped. The campaign to oppress us has not stopped. It never has. That's the whole point. That's why Juneteenth matters. It is not about were the last of us informed about the end of chattel slavery in Galveston, Texas. It's not about that. That is not what it's about. That's not what this is over. That's not what this has to do with. It doesn't have to do with that. It has to do with us remembering our place in history, which is why we are not confused about where our place is today. We serve as the North Star, which is why it is so fitting that the star is on the Juneteenth flag. We serve as the North Star for everybody else around the world who's also falling victim to all of these rationalizations that they give themselves for not fighting oppression. I want to tell you, I'll show you another story here. I thought this one was worth having also. I found this 100-year-old newspaper article out of Houston, Texas, that keeps me grounded when I think about celebrating Juneteenth. 1,000 people were expected for an all-day barbecue in Houston's 5th Ward. My grandfather, Dr. William Drake, was one of the organizers of this event. And here's the part that gets me. They would also have a special dinner set aside for former slaves. And that's why I think about these ancestors on Juneteenth. My great-grandfather, John Taylor, was born in slavery. His father, James Oscar, born in slavery. My great-grandmother, Sister Adeline Kavanaugh, tasted freedom for the first time as a teenager. And my great-great-grandfather, Holly Wilson, was born into slavery. This isn't ancient history. My father knew him and rode horses on his farm in Louisiana. They all knew what Juneteenth was and what it represented for their lives. And that's how I keep Juneteenth in perspective. My grandfather understood this because he was born to formerly enslaved parents. I want to remind you all of something here. I was born and raised in Louisiana. But I do not try to separate Louisiana and the experience of Louisiana from everywhere else. At best, I will tell you, well, Louisiana might be a worst case scenario, but it's hardly the only one. Now, let me remind you of something else. Please remember, just as these people being held captive in all these places in America is remembered by you, the brutal reality is that it is also remembered by the people who were your former slave owners. And just as I am proud of our liberation and our fighting our way out of slavery, these other folks are just as proud of their history of barbarism and brutality. You cannot reform a white supremacist because you are talking to someone who is not a misunderstanding, or he just needs to have his eyes opened. Need I remind you all of a few things here? There was a reason why they executed the Nazi brass in Nuremberg, something that should have happened in America, but because of Appomattox, it was never allowed to occur because white folk. But you all need to understand, practically none, listen to me, practically none of the Nazis, the Nazi commanders, practically none of them were repentant for what they did. When they were marched to the gallows, when they were marched to the gas chambers, when it would be brought up to them about what they did to the Jews, I have no regrets. I did this for the good of Germany. I did this for the good of the people. And the millions of men, women, children, babies. Gotta break a few eggs, make an omelet. When you see the Tucker Carlsons, when you see the Fox Newses,
on code,
when you see the
they
Dinesh
all are
D'Souza's,
on
the
code.
wannabe collaborators with this wicked system, when you
Come
see
on.
them understand something,
Pay a
they
nigga,
see the exact
a
same
white,
thing that you see,
Caucasian,
and they are on the side of the
Anglo-Saxon, pay
devil.
them anything, and they'll do anything because
They see all
used
of this,
to
they
it.
know all of this, and they are proud of it.
Proud of it. know what they say in front of you. They ain't politically correct. They don't use propaganda for
That's the
real
part. There's the reason why
effect
you
of it.
can't make no progress trying to reason with them here. They're proud of what their fathers did.
Talk about it. Speak about it. That's the
We call them
fact.
the American Nazis because that's what they really are. Although in reality, we should be saying the German Americans or the German Southerners. We should be saying that instead because Nazi Germany learned from America, not the other way around. Let me remind you all of that tonight on tonight's broadcast. We might as well encapsulate everything. For those of you who do not know, the National Socialist Party, which adopted the shorthand of Nazi, the National Socialists in Germany, they learned about segregation as a national platform or a national strategy from America. You see, in the midst of the Weimar Republic, I should say Weimar, but in the midst of the Weimar Republic, when Adolf Hitler and the boys, when they were trying to figure out how to ethnically cleanse Germany, they hit a problem. They said, well, yeah, you want to do this, but you can't really segregate a whole nation. It's too big. It's too diverse. You can't do it. Nobody's done it. That's the reason nobody's done it, because you can't really racially segregate a whole nation. It's a nice ambition, but you can't really do it. Then they saw America. Then they said, hey, look over there at the United States. There's a good-sized country, a population they got in the millions, and what they've racially segregated the people. They did it. Well, what do you mean we can't do it? They're doing it over there. And that is, for those of you who do not know, you can Google this. You can look it up for yourselves. That is literally where the Nazi Party got the idea, or should I say the confidence, that they could racially segregate or ethnically segregate an entire nation. It wasn't just about hating the Jews or hating non-Anglos. The real thing is what we gonna do to them. We don't want to just sit here hating on them. What we gonna do about them? Well, there's too many of them. I mean, you can't really do anything like that. And then look in America, they say, oh, yes, you can. America showed them, yes, you can. Yeah, you can. Why, you can make all kinds of laws. Not just that. The miscegenation laws of America, that's the blueprint that Nazi Germany used. Nazi Germany used America as its template. Don't believe me. Yes, when you talk about eugenics, we can go down the list. Don't believe me. Google it for yourselves. When you take a look at the Nazi Party and the Nazi officers and the Nazi government, America was directly their proof of concept. You see, they just wanted to do it, but they weren't sure you could actually make something like that work. Then they looked at America and said, oh, you can. And from there, it was put to the floor. And you haven't heard anybody over here apologize for what they did and say that that was wrong. You know why? Because they are proud of it. Do you understand that? They see themselves as the heroes of this story. The Tucker Carlsons and the Mark Dices, they see themselves as the heroes of this story because of their barbarism. They're proud of the bodies, proud of the deaths, proud of the slaughter, proud of the carnage, because as far as they're concerned, that's what it takes to hold on to power. And that is, to them, that is European society and European heritage. That's what you're proud of. There's a reason that they keep bringing up the Vikings and the Vandals and Leif Erikson and so on and so forth. There's a reason they keep bringing them up. There's a reason they keep bringing that up and referencing it. With you saying, hey, Vandal, didn't that become a euphemism for unrestricted slaughter and mayhem? And they're sitting there smiling at you. Yeah. white supremacy is global.
Facts.
Keep that in mind. White supremacy is global, and just as you feel sympathy for our ancestors, the descendants of those they enslaved, feel pride for their ancestors doing that, and that includes and is complete with the raping, by the way. One more thing, just in case you thought it was any different. Nope. They are also proud of the raping as well, because that is exercising power over you. And it's not power if they cannot abuse it. So therefore, they are proud that they can exercise power over you. They're proud of that. That to them makes it all worth it. I want to go a little bit further here. To add insult to injury, on a day commemorating symbolically the end of chattel slavery, the Department of Labor, that never had our backs, by the way, and has not had our backs since, by the way. Happy Juneteenth from the U.S. Department of Labor. This is a damned insult. A cruel joke from Joe Biden, no less, I imagine. Although he'd be far from the only one. Far from the only one. You take a look at another individual who has been a Trojan horse, whose job was to get into office, and he spent 8 straight years, and every year since then, whitewashing the entire affair, which is why when we talk about the demons of history, Barack Hussein Obama needs to be at the top of that list, because they could not have gotten away with what they have in the last 20 years without his compliance with it. I want to show you all something here. I want to show you something. I want to show you the utter contempt that this bastard has, and I mean bastard has, for us. You take a look at this. On Juneteenth, we commemorate the anniversary of the delayed news of freedom reaching the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas. Let's keep building on the work of the generations who came before us, and making sure that the arc of the moral universe continues to bend towards justice. What a lowlife. And then you take a look at, now this is what he said 6 hours ago. One little old post, that's it. Just one. This is what he said 4 hours ago. Same day now. Yesterday, President Biden announced important new immigration actions to help bring relief and stability to American families. But these are not American families. These are illegal aliens. Some of them build on the DACA program Joe and I announced in 2012, which helped lift the shadow of deportation for hundreds of thousands. And now Joe Biden is saying he wants to legalize 500,000, just with a stroke of a pen, legalize 500,000. And that's why I started off this program letting you all know, by the way, as far as these demonic, animalistic bastards are concerned, if they cannot be allowed to control America, then they will sink America. If they can't be allowed to run it, they'll sink it.
Exactly.
Now, you can understand why Barack Obama would be in favor of this, because he does not identify as one of us, because he isn't. He does not draw his heritage back to the murderous fields of America. And what he's showing is every day, yes, this is the reason they chose him. They also had to understand that they would not be able to do this twice. Now, that's been the real thing they've been grappling with, is they won't be able to do this twice. Barack Obama was the last high yellow Trojan horse that you'll be able to march through here. What he's done has been so egregious, so outrageous, so shameless, you won't be able to march him back through there again. So there's the reason why they're kind of lamenting that, is because, well, you won't be able to get another one through, just as Kamala can't get another one through. And this is why we've had to be hyper vigilant about this. We will not be able to get another one through. Speaking of getting another one through, I want you all to take a look at something here. June 18th, yesterday, she wants to talk about the conflict-related sexual violence. So, I mean, everything for her is rape and abortion. Congratulations to the Boston Celtics on your NBA championship and incredible season. Wonder how many players she slept with back in the day. You want to take odds on that? You're being insulting. All right. Huh. I'm heading back to Atlanta today where Quavo, she's with the Migos. Literally. Quavo and I will reflect on his advocacy to preserve Takeoff's legacy. Okay. I'm not going to say what I'm thinking right now, but it involves Chris Brown. In any case, she's still milking Quavo stunting. Now, this was yesterday. She's put up 2 posts about her and Quavo stunting. And then this fella done showed, I say fella, has shown up at the White House with a whole dress on. I want you all to understand there are a lot of people who are failed parents. Do you all realize there are so many people today who are absolutely incredibly failed parents that this is what they'll sit up here and promote this and defend this. They don't have any idea how to raise children in anything sensible. So when they fail, that's what happens. June 18th, from day one, our administration, President Biden and I have worked to protect illegal aliens, keep families together, and expand lawful pathways to citizenship. So yesterday, she's talking about the illegal aliens, Barack Obama. So these folks who come from that background, you notice how they're not giving their people excuses why they're breaking the law. They're disregarding their oath of office. They're doing everything for their folks. Barack Obama has done plenty to help his people. Kamala Harris is doing plenty to help her people. The descendants of American slaves, they're coming to us with excuses and, oh, we can't get nothing done for you. So they've let us know who their people are. Now you've got Quavo stunting again. This is 3 posts about Quavo since yesterday. Finally, 10 hours ago, we're going to have a sing fest. We're going to have a sing fest with the fellow who erected the prison industrial complex, by the way. I can think of a few things more coonish than this right here. Where are they from? I'm not going to talk about hairlines in this instance. Why does she look like a shaved Rick Ross, the rapper, not the drug dealer? If the rapper Rick Ross shaved that beard, I am convinced this is what you would see. In any case, she finally makes a tweet about Juneteenth. And everything just great. Did you get that? Everything's just great for Juneteenth. Everything's fine. She's not making a post talking about what America owes to the descendants of the slaves. Oh, because she's not one. She's been getting by on our heritage, and it would be different if she were defending it. You don't have to be from our heritage or our lineage to defend it. I am not from South Africa, but I have no problem defending them and singing right alongside with them, Kill the Boer. I have no problem with that. I don't have to be from Zimbabwe to support them. I don't have to be from Kenya to support them. I don't have to be from Ethiopia to support them. Not only am I not in their way, I may not be from their lineage or their heritage, but I don't have to be to support them. There's the difference. And she realizes she doesn't have a leg to stand on, and I know she's hating that I'm broadcasting it tonight, but I just wanted to go ahead and point it out, the FOECU. Here's the second post. Now check this one out. Voting is the fundamental freedom that unlocks all others. And yes, you can't show it was unlocked for us. For her people, coming over from Jamaica and India, for her people, it's done something, but for us, yikes. On Juneteenth, as we celebrate hard-fought freedom for Black Americans, remind your friends and family to register to vote at vote.gov. So she's trying to use Juneteenth to tell you to come vote for them. Couldn't help but notice she wasn't talking like that way to her community, LGBT. She wasn't talking that way to them. So she wants to use us for that. Despicable doesn't describe it enough. Here she is again. Today on Juneteenth, we are holding a National Day of Action on Voting Rights. Join me by checking your voter registration status at vote.gov. And she puts up something here a few hours ago for Willie Mays. She's talking about us right after taking care of her people there. And that's the reason why we have got to be squared down on this. And it can be difficult for some folks to hear and to take in here, but we've got to be squared down on this. You and I are beneficiaries of people who came before us. You may never know their names, you may never know their stories, but do you understand what an incredible act survival was for them? Just to survive that situation, just to survive those circumstances. Do you understand what a Herculean task that was, just to live through that? And to come out with some semblance of your sanity on the other side. Many of you have kinfolk and relatives who served time in prison, and they didn't even serve their whole life there. They'll never be the same. They'll never be the same. That's important for you to remember, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So it is imperative that we lionize everybody who's come before us. It's imperative that we do that, because this is a chain that you can't afford to have broken. You've got to remember what they've been through so you can see what you're going through. You can't have a proper context on where you are and why you are if you don't remember where you've been. And this is where you've been. And that's why the history is repeating itself. At the end of the day, what they're telling us is they didn't do nothing wrong and everything's all right, and that it doesn't matter what happened to you niggas. That doesn't matter. And it's not because they think it doesn't matter. It is because, well, we're white and we say so. They know that this is the status quo, and everything they're doing is about preserving the status quo. And that's why so much of it is concentrated toward deceiving you about it. So that you're deceived about what the status quo is, or they're hoping you'll be deceived or cowed under or distracted. They want you to go ahead and do that because that's a whole lot easier than dealing with it. And they have no intention whatsoever of actually doing that. These are folks who know what they're doing. That's the other thing I want you to get a very firm grasp on. They know what they're doing. None of them are under any illusions today about how we got where we are. They don't want us looking back over our history and over our stories. Because what I'm telling you is it's an unbroken chain to this day. Let me ask you all a question right now. The title of tonight's program is Why Does Juneteenth Matter? Juneteenth is a story about our liberation. But I ask you a question tonight. Are you free? That is a question I want to ask all of you here tonight. If you want to know what the purpose of tonight's broadcast is here, it is simply to ask you one fundamental question. Are you free? Take a look at your great-great-great-grandparents, take a look at your grandparents, and take a look at yourself today. And are you free? Have you reached the promised land? Are you no longer a slave? Have you finally had your God-given rights recognized and acknowledged? That's the question I'm asking you. Because the story of Juneteenth is the story of our people who were not free. And I submit to you that we still aren't today. I submit to you that we are still not free today. Right now in America, any black man can have a white woman simply point the finger at him and say that he is guilty of something, and the prosecutors will get right to work. No physical evidence required, no witnesses required, no anything required.
Come on, let's talk
If a
about
white
it.
woman accuses you of something, the prosecutors will hop right to work
Let's talk about it.
and say, let's roll the dice, let's see if we can lock this nigga up. No evidence, no confirmation. Even when it becomes very, very clear that the accuser is lying, the prosecutors will still continue the case.
Exactly.
They will still continue it and say, well, let's see if we can get somebody to just agree to lock you up anyway. Let's just see if we can do it. Well, she looks credible to me. She looks credible to me. Meanwhile, you can have police on video. You can have police on video strangle you to death, gun you down, run you over, this, that, and the other, and the prosecutor will sit there and tell you, oh, well, insufficient evidence. But it's on video. Yeah, not enough. Not enough. Are you free?
Them motherfuckers not looking for fair justice.
Talking about Juneteenth today, but I hold this as a program to remind you, are we free? What exactly has truly changed? If they have the ability and the wherewithal to still deny your rights to this day at any moment, You see, let me explain to you what makes people think that they are free, and they're really just deceived. There are a good number of people who think that, well, you take a look at the things that used to be quote unquote illegal, and it's not illegal anymore. That's a deceived individual.
You're delusional.
White women have always been having sexual relations with black men. That really isn't anything that you were able to stop or contain. The rescinding of these things like the Mann Act was simply an acknowledgement that that's a waste of resources. It's symbolic, but it's not really something that you're able to impose. You got too many of them who crossed the line. Well, how do you deal with that then? Oh, that's a simple thing. If they do cross the line over there, you keep these fellas here so impoverished and whatnot. If she does cross over there, that's a punishment in and of itself, and she'll be stuck over there. And that's what they do today. That's why whenever you do see these white women who have been off on their interracial sexual adventures, and as soon as that doesn't work out for them, they go back to white society. Oh, he raped me. I was brainwashed. I was off on drugs.
Again.
I mean, she goes
and
back
get
calling
white
and groveling.
privilege for what
They go
the
back calling
system
and
has for them.
Tell me how different that is from where we've been. Tell me how different it is from where we've been. Discussing the fugitive slave laws. What were the fugitive slave laws? Basically, the fugitive slave laws deputized the entire white society.
Talk about it.
White society as a group was then officially deputized.
Speak about it.
To prosecute and persecute black people anywhere and everywhere they were found. Culminating in stories like 12 Years a Slave, where people could claim that you were a slave, even if you were not. So you see, just that it's always been a rule of I'm white and I say so. It's always been that way. And it still is today. So you see, you have certain expanded circuits of movement that you've been allowed.
They can just
You've been
do
allowed
whatever
certain
the fuck they
expanded
want to do.
circles of movement. And a bunch of folks think that having expanded circles of movement is free. Well, where are you going? Well, I'm going over to Becky's house. Where are you going? I'm going to the store. Where are you going? I'm going on vacation. Look at me on Instagram. And I submit to you all, is that free?
Fuck no.
Is your ability to go to Cozumel free?
Power. You have no power. None.
Is your ability to own an iPhone freedom? Y'all remember 20 years ago, you had a whole bunch of old Negroes telling you that was freedom, while you have a cell phone and tennis shoes and you can shop at whatever store you want to. Think about how thick the chains have to be on your mind for you to tell somebody that being able to shop at a store is freedom.
Talk about it. Speak about it.
Think about that for a few moments. For somebody to tell you being able to shop at a store, why, that's freedom. You know what you don't have the freedom to do? You don't have the freedom to exercise power over white people. Now, that one you don't have. Every time you move in that direction, every time you start getting together to do that, every time you start looking like that, all of a sudden, you find out how much freedom you don't have. You don't have any laws that allow you to disenfranchise white people. Now, that's a freedom you don't have. You don't have that. You don't have that. You're telling me that you're free and yet you don't have that freedom. You have freedom of expanded movement among your group, but you are still heavily controlled. Brother Neely Fuller refers to it as confinement or general confinement, and we said when you get put in prison, you're now just in greater confinement.
That's what I'm
Because
talking
the
about.
society is the prison.
I've been
Jason,
known.
why do you say that? Because you're not free if you don't have control. If you don't have the ability to write the rules. If you
Exactly.
don't have the power to write rules for other people. When white people claim discrimination, nobody has to get an act through Congress. Black folk say it, and they tell you we have to have committees and commissions and everything else to even discuss the matter. You don't
Exactly.
have freedom to do that. You don't have freedom to show up and say, hey, here's my rights being violated, and everything stops. And they overturn whole governments. Nobody does that. You don't have that freedom. You don't have the freedom to rewrite white people's history for them. You don't have the freedom to do that. You don't have the freedom to impose that. See, if you're not free to do what they do, then how in the world are you thinking that you're free? If they have powers and abilities that you don't. Furthermore, they have the ability to do things to you that you are not able to do to them. Well, that's not freedom. That's not freedom. A lot of folks are confused that because they think that they can go to an exotic locale, they think they can go outside the country, they think they can have interracial sexual access, they think that they can buy a certain type of vehicle, and that gives you freedom. That means you're free. You understand that in white society, that's not how they define freedom, which is the entire point of commemorating Juneteenth. They define freedom as the ability to brutally rape you. To be able to exercise and indulge in their deepest, darkest, most wicked desires with impunity.
To demean you.
That
To
is
face.
freedom.
To savagely treat you like
The
you
freedom
ain't.
to deny you your rights.
To
Well,
lie
that's
on you.
freedom.
They get
The
off
freedom
on that.
to rewrite or erase your history. That's freedom.
We'll have
The
to
ability
keep on
to
talking
mistreat
about
you
this
and
shit
have an
over
entire
and
society
over.
come to their defense while they do it. That's freedom.
An entire
Notice that
society
definition
turns
is
their fucking
radically different from the one you were told. There's no white person in America who, when you ask them about freedom, they tell you, hey, I can go buy a cell phone. Did you get that? When you talk to white people about what constitutes freedom in America, they don't describe consumerism. They describe instruments of power, not consumerism. Well, Jason, what do you mean by that? See, here's where the average Negro will get confused, but let me go ahead and articulate this for you. You would define freedom, or many of you have been taught, you would define freedom as your ability to drive a Dodge Charger or a Corvette. You would describe your ability to buy one, to purchase one, as power. If you were to talk to people in the dominant society, they would acknowledge the engine in the car as being symbolic of what they consider free. You would focus on your ability to purchase the car while they would focus on the power plant in the car. You would focus on your ability to be covered by the Second Amendment while they would focus on the Second Amendment's utility. Now, that's what they would call. That's the power they would acknowledge. You would simply acknowledge the Constitution and the Second Amendment. They would acknowledge its utility, just like the engine in the car. They don't believe in consumerism being freedom because they understand it's not. They take consumerism as a given. They want to know what gives me the ability to do things and exert myself in the world. Because you see, you can't protect the people around you, much less yourself, if you cannot exert yourself. So when they discuss freedom, it all comes back to power. So you can have a very hard time shaming them about the exercising of power, even if it brutalizes you, because as far as they're concerned, that's the price of doing business. There's never a bad form of exercising power. You all remember, I think it was Equalizer 2 with Denzel Washington? You remember that film? Remember when Denzel is sitting at the table with Pedro Pascal? And he realizes that Pedro Pascal is responsible for murdering his friend, the woman in the movie. Pedro Pascal realizes that the jig is up. We got your cell phone number. We know it was you. And Denzel tells him, when did this become you, man? This is what you are? You're going around victimizing people, killing innocents. And remember, he told him, there are no innocents, just misfortunate. If you see Juneteenth in a microcosm and you tell yourself that was them folk over there back then, that was them folk back then over there, then you've completely lost it. It's not them folk back there over there. That's you and me right here, right now. That's you and me right here, right now. It's essential that we keep a hold of this because we are the only ones fighting it today. We are the only ones still on the job. We are the only people actively fighting white supremacy today. The only ones. We're the only force actually pushing back against the greatest evil that mankind has ever witnessed. We're the only ones.
Speak about it, brother. Speak about it.
We're the only ones.
Talk about it.
And if we don't have a proper context of where we are along that struggle, if we're telling people it's over, if we're telling people most of it's behind us, as opposed to telling them, what do you mean by most of it's behind us? We're still right where we were. If we don't acknowledge that, then we've lost it. And the purpose of doing tonight's program is to make it clear we haven't lost it. We know who we are, we know where we are, and we are only getting stronger in our recognition of it. We're only getting stronger. I am proud of what we've done. I am proud of what we've accomplished. I'm proud of how far we've come. I'm proud of what we've done. I'm proud of what we've built. I'm proud of the dignity and perseverance that led to us being where we are today. I am proud of that. And I want you to have a proper context of what it is that we're proud of. This is not their story. This is our story. And Juneteenth is only one chapter in an ongoing book that's still very much being written. Juneteenth is just one chapter in the book. The book isn't finished yet. The book isn't written yet. Not really sure the Juneteenth chapter is finished yet, but it's not done. Not at all. What I'm going to do tonight here, I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. A little bit different tonight. We've got over 3,000 people in here watching us live right now. And what I want to do is I want to open up the telephone lines. I'm going to open up the telephone lines here. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to call up. And I would like for you to look back. I would like to give you a moment here if you'd like to. Not to give a lecture here. I'm not here to go on and on, please. Because you know what happens when you give folks the microphone. They want to, oh, good, I get to go on for 30 minutes. No, let's not do that. But I would like to hold tonight as a forum to talk about something we usually don't. How many of you got to talk to the old people in your family? How many of you got to talk to the old folks in your family who told you about the way that things were, told you about what they've been through, told you about what they've seen, and it's lit a fire in you? How many of you have been introduced and met the people in your family who told you about what it was like in the slave fields and how they came out of that? How many of you have had that? How many of you have experienced that? How many of you knew them or know them? How many of you have had that? I want you to give me a call tonight. I want us to talk about our experiences as the descendants of the slaves, as the freedmen, as the foundation of this country you're standing in here, and the foundation of civilized humanity. I want to open up the phone lines and give you all an opportunity here to speak on that. There's somebody whose name the rest of us don't know, whose story the rest of us don't know, whose experience they don't know. But I want to open up the phone lines tonight so you all can call in and sound off, because I have a feeling that there's a bunch of people and your stories sound the same. That you come from all these disparate backgrounds, and yet we've got the same story. And I want to give you an opportunity to give us a phone call tonight, if you'd like to. For some of you, it may be very difficult, and I understand that as well. But I want to give you an opportunity to speak on that. You see, what's happened is that, I know this sounds a little bit different from what you all are accustomed to. Jason usually does not do this. But I'm doing something different tonight, because we don't usually get to even tell our story. These other folks out there, they get to tell their stories, even if they're lies, even if they're fabricated. They get to talk about where they've been. We haven't really been able to flesh ours out. And this national mosaic, we don't get to flesh ours out from our experience and show people exactly where we've been and what we've done. We don't get to do that. And I want us to have an opportunity to do that tonight, so I'm going to do that as well. In the meantime here, I want to thank everyone who has contributed to support tonight's program on PayPal, Super Chat, Venmo, my man, Mr. Richburg. Thank you very much for your support. We appreciate that. Chadwick, Walter, B1 Media is a lifesaver, everybody else here tonight. And also just a brief reminder that we are still in the midst of our crowdfunding for 8 a.m. We've talked about Juneteenth and where we've been and where we're at. I'm doing a film about what we're doing and where we need to go, because that is what all of this is about. If I can impress one thing on you all tonight, if I can impress one lesson, let it be this. The entire purpose and point of slavery was one thing only: to determine who would have the best choices, most delicious cuts and slices of life, and who would be living like a dog on the floor, licking up the crumbs off the ground. That's it. It really comes down to that. There it is in a nutshell. Slavery, white supremacy, and racism, it all boils down to determining who's going to have the best in life and who's going to be licking up the crumbs off the floor. Who is going to be able to do whatever they set their hearts and minds to, and who is going to be left without a chair when the music stops. And that's it. And this is why hobbling us and handicapping us and the unfairness and unjustness of everything, that's what it's all about. That's what it's for, is to ensure white privilege and white supremacy. You eat the crumbs and they live high off the hog. And that's why I've dedicated my life and my existence to the discussion and the exploration and the execution of Black socioeconomics, to demystify these things. Because most people are completely mystified by it. I've worked to demystify it, because their greatest nightmares, they're going to wake up one morning and they're going to have a black person who they don't have the power and don't have the ability to take away what they've got. That's their greatest nightmare, is that one day they will encounter a black person that they cannot take what they have, and they cannot execute white supremacy against them. They can't exercise white supremacy on them. That's their greatest fear. We're going to go ahead and take a very brief time out here. When we come back, we're going to get on the phone lines. Just a brief reminder about 8 a.m.
We've grown up in a sea of white
I'm
supremacy.
listening and watching everything.
I think that what
They got a Kendrick Lamar concert on right now for free.
this sense
Why don't you
that
rap
the white
niggas
man's
go
ISIS
over there and
culture,
listen to that?
and that we want to have a seat
You
at
know
that
what I mean?
table and not a seat at our own table.
At LSU, we never had a conversation about the business of sports, about the money that's made. They don't want to have that conversation, because you have that conversation, that's what creates movements.
Most people are miserable. They're depressed. They hate their life. Why do people hate their life? Because they're doing things they hate. Because they feel like they're scared they can't pay a bill.
George Soros probably said it the best, and he said that when he was broke, nobody listened to him, but when he broke the banks over in Europe, he was able to start talking to the heads of state.
Are you listening? Is this thing on?
Let me tell you about the record industry. You walk into a major company, they got some of the prettiest women. You want some Perrier, you want some water. What do you need? The ones they got you, it's just like that. What have you done for me lately?
A lot of those athletes in college, 99% of them will not make it to that high level NBA, WNBA, NFL. If an artist is not a puppet, he's not going to be pulled to the top. That's the bottom line.
Friends is friends and business is business. Never intertwined.
white folks don't give a fuck about you. They want sexual ass. They want sexual access. They want to control you.
The telephone lines now open.
Shit. And that's what
the link to the crowdfunding is in the description of the video. My mods have also put up in the chat room. I look forward to having all of my brothers and all of my sisters joining us for this. I want us to outdo anything that we've ever done before. We have less than 3 weeks left on it, but I want to see all of your names next to mine. We're going to go ahead and go over here to the telephone lines. Let me get caller from area code 757. You're on live with the Black Channel. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Tanya from Virginia Beach.
Okay, Tanya from Virginia Beach. What's on your mind?
I thank you for this broadcast because when I started listening to the black media, I knew that the debt they owed, but I didn't translate it into reparations. So that was my incentive, to make sure my family could get on that line. So when I started to look in my family, my shock was on paper. Between you and Tariq, I went to the 1880, and I saw my grandfather, who ran away, who joined the Civil War, who, oh my goodness, who opened up a bank account thereafter with $50 and put his 5 siblings on it, who was a member of the Freeman's Bank, who they didn't give insurance to civil rights black veterans until 1900. And so the veterans from the Revolutionary War was getting pensions for being veterans, but not the black. It wasn't until 1900. So when that class action came through, my grandfather hired a lawyer, and he got his wife to be a pension. And I'm talking about my great-grandfather, pardon me. And my great-grandfather wife had a pension until she died in 1960 from the Civil War. I'm talking about my great-grandfather. So we're not talking about too far away. And I learned all of this on FamilySearch.com, which is free. I'm employing the family. Please go look at it. And the one important reason is because you can edit the information now. So the people who are putting the information online are what's the name of those people in Utah? The church.
Mormons.
The Latter-day Saints. They volunteer and they put the information. They write what they want, and they can edit it. So right now, anybody, including me and you, could go on today and edit the information. So I'm employing people to get the information, download it onto your website, document it, make a book on Amazon. And I want to thank you so much for tonight. I want to thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you for giving us a call, my sister. We appreciate that. Let me get caller from area code 336. By the way, everybody, you need to investigate your family history. Don't leave it up to somebody else. You need to take that journey. Do not assume that people who come from nowhere, it's very easy to convince you have no value if you come from nowhere. That's why on the plantations, the first order of business was to tell you you don't have a history. If you don't have a history, then you have nobody to fight for except yourself. And that's a very shallow life. So this is why you need to know where you come from. Caller from area code 336, you're on live with the Black Channel. What's your name? Where you calling from?
My name is Chase Davis. I'm calling from Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
All right, Chase from Winston-Salem. What's on your mind?
We're deeply incorporated with the Black Panther Party here in Winston-Salem, one of the founding areas for the Black Panther Party. We used to have free breakfast back in the 70s. So I just want to put that out there. But I was calling on what you said about our ancestors and our elders in the community. Right now, I feel like there's a distance between the elders and the newer generation in the black community. I know that our elders went through a lot and dealt with racism a little harder than what we did, but now that times are changing, I see that some of our elders are selling out to the same oppressors that put us in the conditions that we're in today. I work with a youth program here in Winston-Salem. I coach football, and some of my coaches that I coach with, they're a little bit older than me. They're in their 60s and 70s. I'm in my late 30s. but we have discussions all the time. And right now they're talking about who they're voting for, Democrat, Republican, Biden, Trump. So the other day I told them, I said, both of them are white supremacists in my eyes. And they said, "Oh, young brother, you talking crazy. We gotta have somebody in charge." But what I told them is, what seemed like what we doing every election, every time it's time to vote, all we doing is looking to see which slave master gonna give us the best hand-me-down clothes. Because neither party care about black people. What we need to do as black people is start our own political party and pick our own political representatives. Because Democrats not doing nothing for black folks, and Republicans not neither. But what I'm tired of
Well,
also
beyond
in our
just a
community
political party,
is
though,
the
would be
older
having a code of
generation.
conduct. That's an important thing to have. Political parties are one
Yes,
thing,
sir.
but even if you have, quote, your own political party, if that party is not on code, then you're right back where you started. So
Exactly.
keep that in mind beyond political parties, because there's other groups of people don't worry about starting another political party. They just worry about being on code where they are. I would suggest to you that's a huge thing to have. Thank you very much for giving us a call tonight. I got a number of folk on the line here tonight, everybody, so please try to give us a concise version of it. Thank you. Let me get caller from area code 843. You're on live with the Black Channel. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Hey, Jason. This is More Black from North Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay, More Black from North Charleston. What's on your mind?
Hey, I'm going to try to keep it together and make it quick because I don't want to get emotional. But I want to thank you for this, because this is somewhat of a release. I was fortunate to have father figures, and I'm a daddy's girl. I'm a daddy's girl till the day I die. And I was one of the people who sat and talked to him every night about our family and learning our lineage and stuff. And we lost him a little over a month ago. So I haven't really recovered. And I just want to thank you, because I don't have him to talk to. And, you got to remember, I'm in my 30s. So when you spend almost every day of your life talking to your daddy about your life, and I had the privilege of learning my family and my lineage, I'm slowly adjusting to not having that now. But my family is South Carolina bred, Gullah Geechee, Georgetown, North Charleston, and Beaufort area. And we are the direct descendants of slaves. But what was so beautiful about my family is I never appreciated it growing up. But I appreciate it now. As my granddad used to tell us, if you marry out your race, you're not getting no land. And I used to think to myself, I don't care about that. We ain't gonna never live on it anyway. And he took so much pride, and it wasn't until I got older that I began to realize why he said those things. And he has every right to have his views, and I have mine. But my granddad's family, they came out of slavery, and they were forced into sharecropping and the convict leasing system. My great-granddaddy, right after slavery, started making moonshine. And he was a heavy target here in South Carolina because of the land and the wealth, the little bit of wealth that he did have. He didn't share a whole lot about that because he just, he didn't want to, I think having wealth made you a target. So, long story short, he created moonshine, and they would always move up to taxes on him and stuff. And what was so beautiful about my great-grandmother is she wasn't supposed to work. He had this thing where he didn't want her to work. You stay home and clean your own cabinets. You don't clean nobody else's cabinets. And she started a small business while he would be gone on the road or in the fields. And she started a business washing clothes for whites because it is said that she knew that they would move the taxes up on him and do things to him. And she didn't want to lose the land. So she would start her business, and she would save all her money on the side. And eventually, my granddad would pass, and the land was inherited, of course. Some of it was taken for the railroad, but then my family continued on, and they were able to buy more. So I think we need to know more of these stories as well. That way we can fight for what is ours, as well as keep what is ours in the family. So I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to have him tell me about who I am, why our land is so important. And when I go out there, I don't live out there in the land, but when I go out there, you can feel the ancestors. It's peaceful. And I take so much pride in the fact that my family had this after slavery, and they held on to it ever since then. So I just want to thank you, and I encourage everybody to not only learn their history, but learn other history. There's a guy here in South Carolina, 400 acres of land. He was lynched. His family is now in Chicago. But Mr. Anthony Crawford, one of the most successful black farmers. Land is your wealth. You can do so many things, and I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have sat my behind down and listened to my dad.
Certainly,
So
I
thank
want
you,
us
Jason.
to. The way that they dealt with things, though, is we had to become ingenious. Slavery forced us to. With folks trying to tell you about Jared Taylor and his ilk having the gall to try to tell you about lower IQs. How in the world do we outsmart you all if we got lower IQs? How in the world do we do that?
Right.
How in the world do you have a system of 100% oppression, and yet there were still those of us finding a way to succeed at that? So, having land is a wonderful thing, but I want folks to, more importantly than that, I want them to focus on the ingenuity behind it. So your father and your mother, your grandfather and your grandmother, the ingenuity behind that shows them that, by the way, there's things you can do here that folks haven't even thought of. That's the most powerful thing we can do, and that's why I've always dedicated myself to what we talk about here. Thank you very much for giving us a call here tonight. We appreciate that. Shout out to Jay Freeman Blackman there in the super chat. I cannot put into words how important this broadcast was. This broadcast needs to be in classrooms. This is the classroom now, folks. Those of you who have children and whatnot, there's a reason why I always say, with everything I say, go Google this. You can look it up for yourselves, investigate it for yourselves. Do not leave it up to Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida or Louisiana or Texas or Arkansas or Tennessee. Don't leave it up to them to do this. This is your responsibility. This is your history. These are your children. It is your responsibility because you are in a race war. Call from America 347. You're on live with the Black Channel. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Yes, this is John Mann from Lower Manhattan, New York. I would like for the broadcast. Basically, I knew one of my great-grandfathers. Both of my great-grandfathers were Garveyites. Basically, as a young one, I always wanted to listen to the older ones because I always felt that they might have had some secrets that I needed to know. So even as a child, I would always try and eavesdrop on grown-up conversations. Anyhow, make a long story short, in the early 70s, when Alex
I guess the program stopped. They ain't want you to get too much of the information. It's a trap God, KOD testimony. Sometimes you gotta wake up, stop bullshitting yourself. I think a lot of us already fucking know what's going on and been going on. It's just we want to ignore all of it. Most of the people just want to have a good time. That's all. That's it. They care less about what happened in the past. They live in there now. It's a trap God, man. Your history will be repeated. It will be repeated. Trap God. I could put on any type of beat, any type of music to rap. Is that really what you want? Is that all there is? You got Kendrick Lamar rapping right now. He's got a pop-up show right now. I'm more than just fucking hip hop and rap and trap rap. I'm more than that shit right there.